So people online, please do not hesitate to just jump in and interrupt. I may forget you're there just because I'm responding to the full HD 4K physical world in front of me. But don't be shy, right? I'm there for you as well. In particular, if you can't see what I'm doing, then let me know. So this is joint work with Juliana Losa, and this talk does not report on the mathematical analysis of a blockchain payment system, but I thought I might motivate it. So let's just talk about what a blockchain is. Hands up if you already have an idea of what a blockchain is. Higher, please. Okay, cool. So there's a few hands didn't go up. Out of interest, hands up who knows who could define topological continuity. Okay, well, you're going to have fun. So a blockchain is it's a database and it's made up out of blocks. People on the internet can it's following, isn't it? So it's made out of blocks, and it's what's called a Merkle tree, which means that each block refers to the previous block by a cryptographic hash. So that the magic of a blockchain is that I could take, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, and I could put all the blocks in a hat and then drop that hat on your desk, and you would be able to sort these blocks out into order. What you have to do is take the hashes and follow the pointers. Hands up if that seems simple. Easy, right? And each block is actually a database update. That's all it is. So, I mean, a canonical application of blockchain is money. So there might be a database update, saying, for example, that I pay Najib 50 cents. See, I'm tight. Even in my fantasies, I'm tight. $1 million. So that goes as a state update in a block somewhere, and it gets added, and then suddenly that transfers $1 million to Najib. Very easy. The devil's in the detail, right? How do we decide which block gets put onto the blockchain next? Because it's distributed. So what banks do is, they don't have a distributed database, but the way banks solve that is by being highly permissioned. What that means is you can only do transfers if you're authorized. And in the old days, that meant writing out a check. So you had to have your account, you had to have your checkbook. There was layers and layers of permission and authority to make sure that only good transactions get put into the ledger. But the essence of the blockchain is it's a distributed permissionless system. Anyone can jump on at any time. Would you like to start trading in Bitcoin?
That's not for me.
No. Okay, but if you did, you could. You wouldn't have to ask my permission. Make sense? So this is what's called a permissionless system. And in fact, moving a little bit away from blockchains in particular, there's this family of permissionless systems. These are systems that are not just distributed, but decentralized. Anyone can join, anyone can leave. It's a bit like life. You may have noticed that people join life and they also leave life. And they don't need permission to do so from the central authority most of the time. Okay? So life itself is permissionless. And there are, blockchain is a famous example, but we can think in the abstract about the permissionless system. So how could a system in which there's absolutely no control of who's participating in the system, how could it make any kind of decision at all? Well, let's think of some solutions. One way would be to cite, right? Or to raise, I should say to raise. And that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is what's called proof of work. The name is, it's true, but it's a little bit misleading. It's a competition to see who can solve cryptographic puzzles first. And the first person to solve a cryptographic puzzle gets to put the next block on the blockchain. So it's a fight in the sense that you're all fighting to solve the puzzle first, and the person with the biggest mining rig probabilistically is going to win more of the time. So what gives you permission is great, computational strength. Hands up if that makes sense. Okay, so that's proof of work. Proof of stake takes another solution. By the way, people on the internet, how am I doing? Can you put your hands up, give a reaction if what I'm saying makes sense? Bob Swaraj, Philip, I know you're there. Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. So proof of stake, this is how Ethereum works now. It has an absolutely Heriot solution. So we'll let the rich rule. So in Ethereum, the rich rule the world, and that's a fiction, not about money. The more tokens you have, the more voting power you have. I'm simplifying, but that's it. Okay. Here's another solution. How about when you join the system, you say who you trust? And then you negotiate amongst the people who you trust as to who puts the next block on the block. Now, let's do a worked example of this. And I'm going to move away from blockchain because it's a useful, motivating example, but this is now moving into social choice theory, which has a notion of winning coalition. A winning coalition is a group of people, I'll say people, but I mean agents, a group of people such that if they vote for something, then the system can progress. Now, that could be electing the next president, it could be putting the next block on the blockchain. It's called a winning coalition. I'll call it a progressing coalition because in the systems that I'm interested in, we're not interested in winning, we're interested in making progress. The system wants to make the next decision and then continue. Okay, I can see some of you may be actually reading the slides. Yeah, so the typical, can anyone think of the typical winning / progressing coalition in real life? How are the things usually done? How are votes sectors? Yes.
Yeah, governments, like in Germany, usually the governments from the coalition of several parties that then can get
a what? What's the word?
majority.
Majority, yes, that's right. So this is called there's a notion of quorum implicit here. And the idea is that whoever can get a majority, that's a winning coalition, it's a progressing coalition, so you can make the next step. And then you come to the next vote, you wait for another majority, and so on. So it's the notion of quorum. I will draw a quorum for you. It will be on the slide somewhere. No. Where's a quorum? Somewhere in here there's a quorum. There we are. So I got this off the internet. And I hope that each of these circles has slightly more than half of the area. That's a perfectly legitimate quorum system. Okay? But there's a catch with majorities. In a permissionless system, there's no notion of total system size because people can join and leave at any time. It's a distributed system, so it's like we're all shrouded in fog. I can shout like, Najib, are you there? Me. Hi, I trust you. Okay, is there anyone else out there? Who's that? Right? So I don't know what the majority is. I mean, God knows up there. He's watching, laughing, but that's not much help to actually engineering a practical system. So we need some notion of local quorum. Right? In a permissionless system, it's not possible, it's not going to be well defined to say we make progress when the majority vote for something. It's a nice idea, but it does not work in the real world. It works in a permission system, right? So when I believe these voter ID requirements come in England, that's a permission system. You need permission to vote. You need to register with a central authority. But in a permissionless system, you don't know who's out there by design. It's a feature, it's not a right. So I'm going to introduce a notion of a local quorum. And here is, here's an example. And I have two quorums when it comes to deciding on what to wear. And I think, let's just be clear, this is a system that has to make progress. I have to get dressed in the morning, I have to go out and do my job. So I think that it's important to note here that making progress here is not optional. So the decision does have to be made. So should I wear a t-shirt or a shirt to do this talk? So I can ask my wife and she'll give me anything. Or I can ask, if my wife isn't around, I could ask my son and my mother-in-law. And if any of these two sets agree, then the system can make progress. I feel secure in my decision. Well, this is the same. So, supposing that my son and my mother-in-law say t-shirt's fine, and my wife says, "You kidding? You're standing up in front of the whole world, put on a shirt." Now, I just need to form a quorum. And the quorums are these two circles here. So I can solve this problem by agreeing with my wife and putting on a shirt. Because then there'd be a quorum of people who are voting for a shirt. But I could also solve this problem by agreeing with my son and my mother-in-law. In which case I put on a t-shirt. What matters is that the system progresses. Does that answer your question?
So there might be more people. Right?
Yes, that's right. This is a key point. There could be a participant in the system can have multiple quorums. So, for example, I read, this is going to place me, I guess. I read The Economist, I read the New York Times, I read the Atlantic magazine, I read Prospect magazine. So I could say that if The Economist and the New York Times agree, then I'll believe it. But if the New York Times says one thing and all the others say something else, then I'll believe them. So that's two quorums, right? And notice that the quorums are not closed under intersection. So in this example here, the intersection of these two quorums is just Jamie, and I don't make decisions on my own. I lack the confidence. So I need to have either my wife, some of you may smart, but wait till you get married. I need to have either my wife on board or my son-in-law. Make sense? Let's suppose that my son votes for a t-shirt and my mother-in-law votes for a shirt. Then there's no decision I can make that would complete this quorum. So the simplest thing I can do is just always agree with my wife. If I do what my wife tells me, then we'll always have a quorum and the system can always progress. However, if we were to modify this quorum so that my wife can say my sister-in-law, then the system could fail. Because my wife could say shirt, my sister-in-law could say t-shirt, my mother-in-law could say shirt, my son could say t-shirt, and now there is no decision I can make that will progress the system. So I either have to wait for these guys to sort themselves out and come to some agreement, and then I can vote for that, or maybe I go and negotiate. Maybe I go to my wife and say, look, come on, just let me go in a t-shirt, that's a good deal. Right? Which is, again, very much how real life works. This is how we in real life make decisions. We nominate sets of entities that we trust for various things. And then generally speaking, we wait until one of these sets is showing signs of agreement. Maybe we make some arguments to encourage it, and then we build that. If you're going to the movies, you might not want to go on your own. You might have some groups of friends that you go to see movies with, and then you might go with a group. It has to be one of these groups. Maybe you don't care which one, but you want to go with a group. That's another calling system. Okay, people on the internet, how am I doing? Am I making sense? Can I see a reaction, please? Oh, chat. There's chat. Oh, yes. That's 6 comments. Wow. Okay. If what I'm saying makes sense, please put a comment in the chat. Cool. Thank you, Suraj. Good. Now, let's move on. This looks a bit like a topology to me. All you have to do is identify a column with an open set. Recall that a topology is a set of points, let's call them participants, and a set of open sets that are closed under unions. Well, columns are closed under unions. If my son, mother-in-law, and wife all agree, then fabulous, and me as well. The union of 2 columns is a column, but the intersection isn't. So let's call this thing a semitopology, because in topology, intersections of open sets are open. In semitopology, they're not. And I have 89 pages of maths, which says that that's a really interesting idea. There's a link on the announcement. Let's see where we can go with this. So I think I might have stuff on this slide here. Yeah, done. Oh yes, so let me just set up some dramatic tension here. Let's suppose we have a permissionless system and when participants join, they nominate their open sets. They just say, these are sets of people in the system that we try. So that's a bit like just taking a table and throwing all the participants on the table and then just putting hoops around them, right? So when you join Heriot-Watt, you're required to name sets of people that you trust. No, not really. But you were required to join a department. Yeah. So in a sense, I mean, I'm stretching things a bit, but for the sake of analogy, you've got chucked into a particular core. Yeah, give me that for the sake of argument. But in a permissionless system, you just somehow, I mean, there's a theory of how these open sets are created, but there's no reason why we should expect a tangle of these open sets to do anything sensible. And if there's time, I will prove to you a remarkable result, a self-organization result, that an arbitrary semitopology will self-organize into self-partitioning the areas of consensus. But I'll need a bit of maths to show how that works.
Quick question.
Yes, Najib.
This something similar to like coalition forms in cooperative game theory.
I don't know cooperative game theory, but almost certainly yes, there is a parallel. And I say that because I have spoken with social choice theorists, and a lot of this stuff is applicable. I'd be very happy to discuss the specifics to see how it might be fit into a semitopological context. I'd love that. Thank you. So let's talk about continuity. This is the definition of topological continuity, straight out of the textbook. So a function from x to y is continuous, then if you take a point and go over there, so we have P, we go to f of P, and then so every open set containing f of P, if we take the, I read it the wrong way around. Ah, never mind. So we start here, I think this is from P to f of P, and then you take an open set, and you take its inverse image, and then you're supposed to find an open neighborhood inside that inverse image. This diagram is complete garbage, or I'm misreading. So I will draw this. People on the internet, I hope you can see this. So we have Actually, I have my mistake. My pleasure. Anytime. Anytime. So we have a space here on the left, P, F of P, and we take a quorum of F of P, and then we take the inverse image, which will be some spiky, crazy thing, and F is continuous if within this we can always find a nice quorum. Okay, that's the definition. I'm going to take, on the right here, I'm going to take what I'll call a value domain. The simplest value domain is just true or false, 1 or 0 with a discrete topology. So we're just trying to make a decision, yes or no. In which case, we don't have to quantify over every open neighborhood here because there's a canonical singleton neighborhood here. So this spiky thing here on the left is all of the people who voted the same way as P. And to say that there's an open inside the set of people who voted as P is just to say that P has a quorum. Right, a quorum of parts. P's quorum, an open neighborhood of P that agrees with P. Does that make sense? Yeah? So continuity equals consensus. Yeah? Remember I said that a participant can progress when they know they have a quorum. That's precisely topological continuity. So now we've reduced the problem of understanding permissionless consensus to the problem of understanding continuous functions from semitopologies to value domains. That's it. I'll call these value assignments. And we want to understand value assignments. Hands up if I can carry on. Yeah? Good. In the chat, can I carry on? Bruno, Marco, Swaraj. Okay, thank you. I'll just mention the difference between topology and semitopology. I said that we want our value assignment to be continuous, but I just want to point out, let's consider 3 participants, 0, 1, and 2, and here are the quorums. Let's just take a look at them. See that? So 1 has 2 quorums, 0, 1, and 1, 2. 0 has 1 quorum itself, so 0 can act completely autonomously, and 2 has 1 quorum itself, so 2 can act autonomously. It's a perfectly legitimate semitopology. Notice that the intersection of these 2 quorums, singleton 1, is not a quorum. 1 requires the permission of 0 and 2, 0 or 2 to progress. Now let's suppose that 0 decides on true and 2 decides on false. They have every right to do so because they have their own private singleton progressing coalition. What can one do? Yes?
So it doesn't matter because either one they will have a phone with one of the neighbors.
You're right. My mistake. You're absolutely right. 1 brownie point, 2 brownie points to you. Thank you. So now 1 has only 1 quorum, 0, 1, and 2. So 0 and 2 can progress, but 1 cannot. Because there's nothing poor 1 can do. And putting this in technical language, there's no continuous way of completing this function. There's no continuous extension of this function here to 1. But this actually tells us something very valuable. In topology, we tend to think in terms of continuous functions. If you open a textbook and ask what's the category of topological spaces, it says topological spaces and continuous functions between. course, not all interesting functions are continuous, like f of x equals 1 divided by x, but yeah, that's just an isolated point. The emphasis is on continuity. Here, it cannot be. So we're interested in value assignments that may not be continuous, either because a point has an unfortunate choice of quorum, or possibly simply because we're not yet in a consensus state. So let's take a very simple system. Let's take Jamie and Jamie's wife. We've got one quorum. Jamie says yes, Jamie's wife says no. So they can't progress. So what do? They negotiate. They try to find a continuous value assignment that they can then progress on. Right? So I'll just note, the world of Semitopologies is not just interested in continuous function, it is interested in building continuous function, but even then they may not be continuous everywhere just because of the structure of the Semitopology, and that's a feature, not a bug. Okay, can I carry on? Hands up if I can carry on. Outstanding, thank you. So let's prove some results now. So here is the definition of Hausdorff separation. Hands up if you've seen this before. Try, please. Hands up if you haven't seen Hausdorff before. Okay, cool. So Hausdorff. It's one of a family of separation axioms. If you go to Wikipedia and search for separation axioms, I think we'll find 13 different flavors of separation. It starts at 2-0 and is 2-1 and 2-2 and 2-2 plus 2 and regularly and all sorts. Hausdorff simply says, well, it's here on the slide really. If you have two distinct points, they're separated by two distinct local neighborhoods. So every 2 points have distinct cores. Let's take the negation. Let's call 2 points intertwined. Like that. Oh yes, so between open sets, this means that the sets intersect. I spent a day searching the latex symbol list for just the right symbol. I found this is the high point of my academic career. This symbol here for 2 sets intersecting. And 2 points are intertwined when they cannot be separated by 2 disjoint opens. So, now G, actually no, oh, sorry, what was the one? Achille. Yeah. We have never met before here. So, I don't know you. But it's quite possible that every one of your quorums intersects with every one of my quorums. But yeah, they move in the same social circles. So if you think about it, that means that even though we've never met, we're likely to be in agreement. Because you go away and you make a decision by consulting your quorums, and I go away and I make a decision based on my quorums, at least in professional matters to do with academia, there's going to be an intersection between these points. Yeah? So you make your decision and you think that you're making a completely independent decision from me, but it's not because all of our quorums intersect. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we are intertwined. Don't take it the wrong way, but we are. And that's because it's an anti-Hausdorff property. So, I guess that means that any continuous value assignment will agree between us. Let's just run that through. I want to make a decision, yes or no. I consult my quorums. I find one that agrees. I don't know which one, but it agrees. And you consult your quorums and you find one that agrees. And they intersect. So I know that I voted yes, you must also vote yes, because you must have a point in common who votes the same as both of us. Yeah. So between intertwined sets, continuous value assignments are constant. The remarkable thing, which I will prove, is that every semitopology partitions into partitions of intertwined points. So any random semitopology will self-organize into what I will call communities. Technical. It's a community, and we see this in real life as well. You take a random gathering of people, let them build social bonds, develop their quorums, and pretty soon you've got tribes and communities, and they're coming to consensus and acting within their communities. Yes, well, there are sound mathematical reasons for it, it turns out. Let's prove this. Okay, so I've proved this then here. If P is intertwined with P primed, then where consensus succeeds, so where F is continuous, they must agree. Let's call the set transitive. Here, this is quite a good definition. If O intersects S and S intersects O primed, then O intersects O primed. It's just a definition. It's quite useful actually to think of this as a graph. There's something called an intersection graph. If you have a semitopology, you can form an intersection graph by letting points now be open sets, and there's an edge between two open sets when they intersect. Then a transitive set is literally a transitive point. If there's an edge in and an edge out, then there's an edge across. Make sense? And I'm going to call this token. You know, clopen, it's closed and open. Token is transitive and open. When it's transitive and open, would you like me to prove lemma 1? Hands up if you'd like me to prove lemma 1. You're an optimist, thank you. So it's quite not entirely obvious. S is a token if and only if it's open and all of its points are intertwined. As you see, it's easy to prove. Suppose that S is transitive and open, and let's take 2 points in S, and let's take 2 open neighborhoods of P prime. Well, by definition, O meets S meets O prime because S meets O at P, because P is an S and O is an open neighborhood of P, and S meets O prime, so by transitivity, O meets O prime. And the converse is no harm. So a token is a set of intertwined points. Am I losing you yet? Okay, and this is important because we can cross-reference it with consensus equals continuity, and this lemma here, that continuous value assignments agree between intertwined points. A continuous value assignment will be transitive. Sorry. A value assignment will be constant on a token because it's a set of intertwined points. So these tokens are like those communities I was talking about. Now the next thing is, if you have 2 intersecting tokens, then their union is token. And I'll just prove that very briefly. The union of 2 open sets is open. So we just need to show that if you have 2 transitive open sets that intersect, then the union is transitive. The easiest way to see that is to think in terms of a graph. If you have an O here that intersects with S, that intersects with F prime, that intersects with O prime, then you just fill in the transitivity property and you have a length from O to O prime. Done. And also, a ascending chain of tokens is itself token, easy proof. And it follows from this by a very easy argument that any semitopology will partition itself into maximal tokens. Very simple, you just take all the transitive sets, they intersect, you take unions, you find a maximal transitive open set, call these communities, and you go. It's really easy, right? Proofs are beautifully simple. So if I take a random semitopology, then it will consist of a partition of maximal tokens, which I'll call communities. And value assignments will be constant on these communities where consensus agrees, in other words, where they are contributing. Any questions? Any questions in person or online before I move on? Okay, can I carry on? Hands up if I can carry on. Thank you. Can I have a reaction from people online, please? Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Swaraj. Well, I guess that's our theory of consensus pretty much nailed down. We proved that permissionless consensus is possible. We just need to ask people to nominate their quorums when we join, and then they just need to progress as their local quorums. And the theory of semitopologies tells us that they will self-organize into different communities that can progress. It's important, right? They can progress. Is it bad that there may be more than one community?
That are not that don't agree.
So Machine said, what if you have two communities that don't agree? Can you hang on a second? Can you not progress? So this is why I call it progressive coalition. Each community can make progress independently because they are an open set that's in agreement. So if you have a system with multiple tokens, multiple communities, they're distinct. You know this because intersecting communities are just one community. But they can make decisions independently. So one community could evolve to, say, like Marmite, and another could evolve to not like Marmite. And then they can still eat, they can still live their lives, just in their separate consensus. Did somebody say something?
No, it's just
Okay. So when I describe this to people in blockchain, from blockchain background, or even from a social choice background, sometimes they instinctively say, no, you can't do this because you can't have two communities going their own separate ways. Everyone has to be in consensus. But I think that's a misunderstanding what's going on here. For example, in blockchain, you may have a mainnet and what's called a test net. So there is, I believe, an Ethereum testnet, and the Ethereum testnet is actually probably several Ethereum testnets. You could probably download an Ethereum protocol and start your own Ethereum testnet. So it's still Ethereum, it's just not in consensus with the community. So actually, it's normal to have multiple communities. That's normal and healthy. What may be less desirable is if you have one community that embraces secrecy, that's called a fork. And arguably, that is a bug, but not always. For example, taking the example of Ethereum, then, Ethereum did fork famously into ETC and ETH. So these things do happen. So for me, it's a feature that semitopologies model this kind of behavior.
What in the context of politics?
You got it, absolutely. These forks do happen. So I haven't been enjoying political analogies here, but they almost draw themselves. You see this kind of thing all the time. Yeah. And this is what when I talk with social choice people, this is one of the things that we discuss. And it's also interesting you mentioned games theory. It's something that I haven't had the expertise to think about is how combining game style incentives with semitopologies would work. Right? But for example, how could we structure incentives to discourage communities from splitting into? This is a very interesting and very practical question. Oh, do I want to talk about communities? Hang on, I do have notes about what I want to cover. Let's see. Let's see what my notes say. Okay, I've done Hausdorff, I've done intertwined, I've proved the partitioning result. Okay, I know what I want to tell you about. I'm going to tell you about witnesses. Okay, and then I'll stop. So there's tons of material we could discuss, but let's talk about witnesses. And maybe I should open up. Okay, people on the internet, can you see this? Good, outstanding. Thank you, Bruno. So we've done transitive sets. I'm not talking about closures, the witness function. Outstanding. I really enjoy this. So I don't know if you can, certainly people in the audience might not be able to read this. Let's just think a little bit more carefully about semitopologies. Here's a semitopology for you. Participants will be numbers. And quorums, open sets, will be uncomputable subsets of the natural numbers. Or units of them. So this isn't a topology because an intersection of two uncomputable sets of numbers is not necessarily itself uncomputable, but it's a set. And by construction, there is no way to compute a quorum in a semitopology. But let me rephrase that. We can compute a quorum, you can just take all the natural numbers, but there are quorums, many quorums that we cannot compute. Does that make sense? Hands up if that makes sense.
This is actually an uncomputable subset.
Say again?
What would be an example of an uncomputable subset of natural numbers?
I will not give you a Turing machine to compute one of them after the talk. Right? So a subset of natural numbers is uncomputable when there is no Turing machine that will enumerate precisely that set. And it's easy to prove that such things exist, but by construction, impossible to provide an algorithm to compute them. Right? Thank you very much for your question. So this is not rocket science in the sense that you get this phenomenon with any infinite set. And if you talk about its subsets, you can talk about uncomputable subsets of that infinite set that comes from infinity. But it should motivate to ask ourselves, can we define a subclass of all the semitopologies that is computationally practical? And the answer is yes, very much so. And so what I'll do is, here, I guess this may be a bit small. Given a set of parts, can I make this bigger for you? Of course it can. So here, definition 5.2. A witness function, W, maps points to a non-empty set, non-empty finite set of non-empty sets of participants. Maybe this is better explained with an example. I want to join your permissionless system. And now I'm not going to name full open sets, but I will name a set or sets of people that I've got. But those aren't necessarily open sets. I'll call them my witnesses. So they're people who are enough to convince me. But these witnesses may not themselves be open sets. Very good moment. From this, I can generate a witness topology like so. Just for the sake of argument, let's just suppose that your witness is, you just have one witness. You could have multiples, but your witness is always the row sitting behind. Or in your case, go back. Okay? So I want to join the system. So I'm going to name two witness sets, Nati and Ina. Both single. I trust you. I trust you. And I can make progress if either of you agree to it. You have your own witnesses. Ina, your witness is Natalia. Your witness is a human. So again, a human. You're going to have to write it down. I'm not winding you up, I'm just giving you, write it down. So, your witness is a gentleman sitting behind you, and your witness is a gentleman sitting behind you. You've all got single witnesses, in fact, because there's no two people sitting on a row. So now, when I join, I'm going to end up with two columns. One column is the right-hand side, because in the witness semitopology, the way it works is that you close on the witness. Right? So, in order to close on the witnesses, I need one witness in my column. So that will be energy, and then you close on your witness, you close on your witness, and you don't need to trust anyone. You're in a singleton, okay? Or we could follow Ina, and then we get that up. So we have just built a witness semitopology out of the individual slices, the individual witnesses. Does it make sense? Hands up if that makes sense. That's a witness semitopology. And this is computationally tractable because I can come up here and I could say, hey, I trust Ina, I trust Eugene, and then the system will go ahead and compute open sets just by locally, incrementally adding witnesses. That is computationally tractable. Hurrah! Okay? That is how Stellar actually works. There is a real-life blockchain system running now that works exactly like that. Okay, and for my next magic trick, because I'm running out of time, I'm just going to do something that I personally find really cool. So for each P, we have a witness function, and we're going to write it like this, that what was the witness function? It was a set of sets, right? And I'll just write it as yeah, so for I've done well. Right, I see it's flipped round. Okay, so we need to take the contrapositive of this and say that if for one of the W in the witness function of P, all of the Q agree, then P. Not P. Okay, I suck at doing, apparently I suck at doing contrapositives. Or perhaps I should say that I'm not brilliant at doing contrapositives. But if you just mechanically run the De Morgan dual through, what you get is that a set is closed in the semitopology if and only if it's a model in the sense of logic programming of this Cornclaw theory here. So we can take the witness function, write it as a Horn clause, and solve for it, and we can actually solve for the open sets. So this process that I was talking about actually corresponds to Horn clauses. Witness functions are logic programming. Computing open sets is computing answer sets. It's actually solving a logic program. Which I think is, I think is really neat. Does this make algorithmic semitopology into a branch of logic programming? No, because the things we're asking of these open sets are not typical queries that you see in logic programming. For example, so far as I know, for example, you might ask if all of my quorums intersect all of your quorums, which is saying that if any solution to this logic programming problem includes me, then will it intersect with a distinct solution that you might create that intersects you. Does that make sense to you? Stretch a bit too far. Okay, so let's just sum up. What have we said? We said that there are various ways of handling consensus in a permissionless context. One way is to list, that's proof of work. One way is to say, well, the rich just rule the universe, that's proof of stake. Another way is to explicitly represent the quality of trust within the system. That's called proof of agreement, and it can be represented as semitopologies. Miraculously, semitopologies spontaneously self-organize into communities on which continuous functions must be constant, which means that because continuity corresponds to consensus, our consensus algorithms, where they succeed, must agree on each community. Okay? To create this notion of community, we needed an anti-Hausdorff axioms, the precise opposite of Hausdorff, being intertwined. We noted that in a mathematical sense, not all semitopologies are algorithmically tractable, but we pointed out a wonderfully simple algorithm for creating semitopologies by means of a witness function. And basically, all we do is we say, okay, you want to join the system, that's fine. Tell us who you trust. And then we'll just create the open sets by closing under, non-deterministically under this property of trust. I call these things witnesses. And then we notice after a few months that witness functions are actually whole clauses. So this particular computation is simply a distributed logic programming. Okay. I can't resist just mentioning, I think I've got 2 more minutes, a few of the other things that are in the larger paper. So one other computational problem is that deciding whether 2 points are intertwined is computationally difficult because we have to compute whether all I'll talk to you instead of formal has been very patient. If we ask do all of my quorums intersect with all of your quorums, then we have to compute all the quorums twice. And you may recall I pretended that the whole room was misty and suddenly I don't know who's out there. Are you still out there, Najib? Do you know what your quorums are? Yes. No, you don't. You can't. You can't because even if you could survey the entire system, by the time you finished, it would have changed because it's a permissionless system. So on the face of it, asking whether 2 points are intertwined is computationally potentially a difficult problem. In practice, it might be very simple because you might have the network might be working fine, it might be stable, in which case we could just poll the whole universe and compute the open sets. But we can't depend on that. It's no good in blockchain to write algorithms that work brilliantly so long as no one's attacking them and the network's working perfectly. I mean, that's great for making progress, but we need some robustness, right? But it turns out by another small miracle that we can not quite compute tokens, but what we can compute is topological closures. And it turns out that every topological closure will include a token. So if we can get agreement on a topological closure, then we know there's a token in there somewhere, and therefore we know that progress can be made. And computing closures is dead simple. So my closure, right? A set is closed when I'm in a closed set when every one of my open neighborhoods intersects that set, but my open neighbors are generated by my witnesses. So if I want to know if I'm in the closure of you guys, I just need to check whether all of my witnesses intersect. Yeah? And that's simple because I look at two different sets, G and Ina, they're both in the set of people. So yes, I am in the closure of the people sitting there. The closures are easy to compute. And that's good enough to generate tokens. It's important you don't know where the tokens are. That's hard. But you know they're in there somewhere, and that's good enough to make progress. Because all we need is the existence of a link coalition. We don't need to know precisely what it is. Isn't that amazing? Right? It's cool. And closures are highly computable. So now we start looking at what closures mean, and just to finish off, that when you think about it, it leads us to what dense sets are in semitopologies. And denseness is a fascinating topic. It's quite different from topology. The notion of denseness, it splits into two separate notions, both of which turn out to be important. And that leads us to something that I cannot tell you now, but there is something that corresponds to Arrow's theory. Arrow's theory comes out of social choice theory that there is no perfect democracy, there's no perfect voting system. If you hypothesize a perfect voting system, it devolves into a dictatorship. Look up Arrow's theory and see. We see the same phenomenon in semitopologies, that inside every token, inside every community, it turns out that there is a small clique of highly connected participants whose decisions dominate the behavior of the community. It's absolutely amazing. We call it a curve. So it behaves like a dictatorship. And to be clear, there's no conspiracy required here. It comes mathematically out of an arbitrary semitopology. So, to sum up, if I give you an arbitrary witness function, you can generate a witness semitopology from it, you can compute on it. It will partition itself into communities, and inside those communities are little cliques that are running the universe. That concludes my talk. Thank you very much. Any questions? Chat. Thank you, Bruno. Okay. Surely there must be a
So I know there's kernels in social theory or probability theory. Did it come from there? Or?
No.
Okay, so
just create a pyramid to the side of pyramid.
I think there's, as far as I can remember, there's such a term in the social theory. But yeah, I don't know.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we could go for a coffee.
Sure, yeah. I have some knowledge of social theory because my research about game theory, so maybe perhaps there is some connection here.
It's entirely possible. These things do keep turning up. Thank you. No, I'd love to hear more. Not right now, obviously, but please hold me.
Sure.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Yes, please.
I was thinking back when you said that it's not a problem when several communities emerge, right? But if you go back in a blockchain setting, how is this case handled?
Perfect, thank you. So what was your name?
So,
Annie has said, he said no, but he said, hang on, Jane. Get real. What do you mean it's not a problem that several communities? Let's imagine that Bitcoin or Ethereum were to fall. Are you saying that wouldn't be a problem? So I can answer this on several levels. It may be that by design, the system is born with multiple communities. And a very good example of that is a mainnet with multiple testnets. Okay? So there, if the testnet were to have forced consensus with the mainnet, that would be a serious bug. Right? That would be a major incident. We don't want the testnet to have forced consensus. I mean, they might coincidentally agree on something, but that would just be a coincidence. Agree? But that's not what you meant. You meant, what if there is a community and then it splits in two? Yes? So even that is not necessarily a bug. So let's look at the Ethereum fork. This is an instance where the chain did fork, and that was considered by some people to be a feature and by other people to be a bug. Depends on your perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Would you like me to expand on that particular incident?
Yeah. And for instance, has there been tentatives to redesign the system so forks could
Well, no. So this fork was not an accident; it was deliberate.
Okay.
So please correct me, internet, if I get my facts wrong. But there was a major smart contract running on Ethereum, and there was a lot of money tied up in the smart contract, and it had a bug in it which allowed someone to empty it. So it would be tempting to say that someone stole all the money out of the smart contract, but Ethereum smart contracts don't have a notion of steal in that sense. The smart contract is what it is, and by varied manipulations of the contract, someone got it to voluntarily give all of the Ethereum stored in that contract to that person. Now, the ideology of Ethereum at the time was very libertarian, but this is, the world is run by unstoppable code, so it's right if and only if it happens on the blockchain. But when the community stood to lose massive amounts of money to this hack, they suddenly discovered a change of heart and decided to change the rules. This was hypocritical and not necessarily wrong, right? So I recommend you study this. It's absolutely fascinating from a social point of view. So the ideology says we should follow the code, but when people stood to lose big, socially they got together and changed the rules. This is exactly what happens in the real world, where people would have gone to court and said, look, I know that's what the fine print said, but it was clearly not the intention of any of the parties signing this contract that it should come out that way, and therefore we would like these transactions reversed. So society has developed methods of rolling back this kind of problem, because it does happen. Ethereum rediscovered the virtues of this and forked it. So Ethereum Classic said, we stand by our principles, the smart contract is what it is, we will honor it. And ETH said, well, no. And basically changed the rules to roll back that. So that's a fork which was created for, certainly for good, real reasons, and whether it's a feature or a bug depends on whether you stay with UTC or with UTC. A lot of engineering effort goes into making sure that a functioning blockchain system, I feel a bit uncomfortable sticking with blockchain, but since that's what we're talking about, will not fall, even when it's under attack. Okay? A lot of effort goes into this. So if it's an unintended fork, then that will certainly be a bug. Now, in proof of work and proof of stake, it's hard, but not impossible, to fork one of these blocks. In proof of agreement, it's a bit more of a grey area. Because, for example, you can imagine a semitopology that just by coincidence has one participant in the middle. And if that participant drops out, it splits. An hourglass shape. That could be a real one. And in practice, systems that use proof of agreement will have somebody somewhere just keeping an eye on the network. And in practice, these networks are highly connected, very highly connected, so that doesn't happen. But there's always a worry in the back of people's minds, and they want to keep the system connected. And if it looks like one node is becoming too dominant, or one node is becoming too isolated, then they might literally pick up the phone and say, hey, look, mate, can you change your callings a bit? Surely there must be someone else you trust, you know. Get a bit more connected. So that literally can happen. How to automate that, how to make sure that will scale from hundreds of nodes to millions of nodes is an open research problem. And that's what I had in mind when I was talking about incentives. How could we set up incentives so that a proof of agreement network, one of these semitopologies, will tend to self-organize into a highly connected group? That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay. Internet. People in the box, do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you, Philippe, for staying with us. Much appreciated. I admire your stamina. Okay, shall we wrap up? Thank you for having me.